Accidentally played a YouTube video.
And welcome to episode 477 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Michael O'Malley
and Andrew Swafford.
And in today's episode, you better be a fan of Pinocchio because all this episode is Pinocchio content.
Our Pinocchio
100%.
Marathon podcast.
Yeah, we're just...
No one asked, but we delivered.
No one asked for it, but have we got one for you? Yeah.
Not even scratched the surface of Pinocchio cinematic history, by the way.
So you're getting all of this, and it's not even really doing its job very well. That's what Michael's saying. In part one, we're going to talk about Pinocchio movies that we watched this week in anticipation of this.
Can we put that in the description? Part one is Pinocchios we watched this week.
Yeah, I'll do that. And then in part two, we're going to be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1940s Pinocchio. Because by that point, you'll be like, man, you know what I need? I need a refresher.
More Pinocchio.
More Pinocchio.
It's the movie of the summer.
Yeah.
Everybody's talking about it.
By the end of this episode, we'll be like looking at movies going, giving me strong Pinocchio vibes.
You're just starting to wait for like a whale to show up in each movie you watch.
Yeah. All right. Well, Michael, you subjected us to this, so I'm going to start with your movies.
Yeah. So I watched a handful of Pinocchio movies, and I'm just going to kind of do a quick survey of them all because I don't think none of the I watched 3 Pinocchio movies plus a making of doc for the Disney's Pinocchio, which I'll probably save that for part 2, any tidbits I got from that. But the 3 that I watched that weren't like Disney affiliated are in chronological order: The Golden Key from 1939, which is a Soviet movie that is not technically a Pinocchio movie, but because they call him, what do they call him? It's based on a Soviet novel that's like basically ripping off Pinocchio. I don't know what a copyright looked like in the Soviet Union, but
wasn't Pinocchio a hundreds of years old story?
No, it's from like the late 1800s. So yeah. By 1939, I'm not sure if it would have been in public domain. But anyway, they basically use a bunch of Pinocchio iconography and story beats, but in the context of a larger story that's not really part of Pinocchio. Anyway, so that's The Golden Key. And then I watched 1965's Pinocchio in Outer Space, which is what it sounds like. And then I watched 1987's Pinocchio and the Emperor of the Night.
Damn, so it sounds like a fucking Castlevania game.
Yeah, you would wish you were watching Castlevania after that one. That's also not only chronological order, but descending quality as well.
Damn.
So I'll just start with The Golden Key, which I had for a long time mistakenly assumed was a stop motion film, like an exclusively stop motion film. And so I have like a letterbox list of like animated features I'd like to watch. And this has been on there since forever. It turns out this is not a stop motion film. This is a live action film, but Pinocchio and all of the like associated puppets are have scenes in which they are stop motion. By the way, the Pinocchio ripoff name is Buratino in this movie. Anyway, so kind of like in a lot of Pinocchio stories, there is a old man who carves a puppet out of wood. And this puppet turns out to be alive. But this movie has like an overarching plot in which like the Stromboli puppet master character is looking for a key that will like open up a door to a magical realm that has like crazy like riches or something in it. And so like this movie is like interspersing like bits of the Pinocchio stories. So like they have like the trickster like cat come in like in the story. They have the scene which isn't in the Disney movie but it's in the book where the trickster cat convinces Pinocchio to bury something of value because it's going to create a tree that will grow that thing of value. In this movie it's a coat, and then he just steals it from the ground. So it uses a bunch of these Pinocchio tropes in this weird story that is apparently set in Italy, because everyone's got Italian names, but is like very like Soviet in other ways. But anyway, I mean, the reason to watch this is to watch like kind of early stop motion, which is like admittedly cool. There's like some cool effects in this, especially they have these composite shots where sometimes Pinocchio and the other fantasy characters are stop motion, and other times they're live action. But because it's a composite shot, they've been like shrunk down, and so they're like interacting with things in the movie as like a shrunk down character, like as an effect. And that's all pretty cool. Like a lot of these Pinocchio movies, it's kind of dull. It's got like its moralizing parts. But anyway, The Golden Key, the best of the three that I watched.
And that's not saying much, it seems like.
Yeah. Although I will also say, though, one interesting thing about this is every other one I watched is clearly very, very, very heavily inspired by the Disney Pinocchio, which I think like basically
Golden Key
overtakes like
predates Disney's Pinocchio.
yeah, this is from 1939, which Disney's Pinocchio wouldn't come out for another year, I think. So, and also they're in the Soviet Union. I don't know how much Disney like reached out to the Soviet Union, but
Probably all the time.
yeah, I mean, sure. I'm sure the
think
Soviet
Walt was
Union was
a
just
man.
welcoming famous socialist Walt Disney into into the USSR. But the other two, like, it's clear that the version of Pinocchio they have in their mind is the Disney one, whereas this one, because it predates the Disney one, is basically drawing on the novel. And so you have like stuff from the novel that never makes it into the later movies that I saw. So like in the novel, the log is talking to Geppetto while Geppetto is like carving him out, and that happens in this movie. Obviously, doesn't happen in like the Disney Pinocchio. So anyway, that's another kind of cool thing is this one preserves a lot of the old weird stuff from the Italian novel that never was in the other ones. So anyway, Golden Key, 1965's Pinocchio in Outer Space is
Let's
supposed.
go.
This is a supposed to be a sequel to Pinocchio. Like a
Like the
lot
Disney
of
Pinocchio.
well, so it's ambiguous.
Okay.
A lot of these, and I'll talk about this more with the Emperor of the Night, but a lot of these kind of like say that they're based on the public domain Pinocchio character from the Italian novel, but the way that they do things kind of indicates no, you're actually basing this on the Disney one, but you're just saying it's the public
because
domain
the novel
version.
is like it's written serially. Every chapter is kind of a different story. It's like way bigger and darker than the Disney version. I think most of the stuff that happened in the Disney version comes from like the back nine of the novel, which was like after the author had already like killed off Pinocchio and then brought him back like in response to public like appreciation of the character.
It's complicated. The novel is deeply strange, but it was in the public domain after a while. So you could make Pinocchio movies as long as they weren't Disney Pinocchio movies. But the funny thing is, like these all feel like Disney Pinocchio movies. Like the design of the character is a lot more boyish and less puppet-like, which was a design decision that the Disney movie made in production. I learned from the making of Doc. You have the persistence of the like sidekick animal conscience character, whereas in the book, like the cricket gets killed immediately when he shows up, and then like Pinocchio just freaking like murders him with the mallet.
Which to be fair, not to jump ahead to part 2, would have been a fine thing to do because it's not like Jiminy Cricket is really all that helpful.
He doesn't really help in any of these.
He doesn't.
No, but in the novel, he shows up as a ghost to like scold Pinocchio at certain points. Whereas in Pinocchio and It Goes to Outer Space, he meets a turtle who eventually becomes his like sidekick conscience. I don't know why there's not a cricket, because I guess they could say it's based on the public domain cricket anyway. But there's this turtle, and they go to outer space because they're trying to figure out what's going on Mars. There's like weird stuff going on Mars that this turtle wants to figure out. And for some reason, Pinocchio's like, yeah, sure, I'll go along with you. I should mention, by the way, this is a Belgian movie. And, well, kind of. It's like a co-production with like Belgian and like American stuff. But anyway, this turtle is like, hey, there's weird stuff going on Mars. We should check it out. And Pinocchio's like, sure, and goes along with him. So at first it's like, okay, I guess this is a sequel because it's different stuff is happening. But then the weird thing is like the same stuff keeps happening to him as happened in the original story. So he keeps being led astray from his mission, tempted by like other people. There's a whale. There's a freaking whale in space. His name is Astro the whale, who swallows him, just like in the movie and the story. Um, the weird thing is though, what they find on Mars is like nuclear activity. Like a civilization has like begun to like create like mutants with the nuclear power, and they have to destroy it. And so they like cause the nuclear reactor to melt down, and it like explodes in a mushroom cloud, and like the whole mutant civilization is destroyed, and then they get swallowed by the whale. Anyway, this one's kind of boring. I know the movie sounds interesting. Maybe if you
So it's a sequel, but it just
it's
traces
like
the beats of the original movie.
it's a sequel that like has a story that's different from the original, but somehow decides that we still need to have the beats that are familiar to Pinocchio. Like he has to have an
It's
animal
not a Pinocchio
conscience.
movie if like, you know, we don't turn into a donkey at some point, or we, you know,
Or don't get swallowed by a whale.
Yeah.
Anyway, Pinocchio in outer space, weird, interesting at parts, generally not that interesting. It's really cheap looking animation. This one is animated, by the way. It's not live action. Yeah, so there's that one. And the last one is Pinocchio and the Emperor of the Night, which sounds badass, but this movie is so boring. So this is an American movie by let's see, Filmation, who had their fingers in Pinocchio in Outer Space. That's the studio, and I knew Filmation before watching this because they made a pseudo sequel to Snow White called, I think it was called Ever After, maybe, or something like that. But it was like claiming to be based off the public domain, like Grimm's fairy tale, like Snow White sort of story, but clearly inspired by the Disney one. And they tried to do the same thing with Pinocchio, where it's like, oh, this is a sequel to the book, but it's actually, you know, drawing on the Walt Disney Pinocchio. And I'm bringing this up again because this time Walt Disney, like the Disney Corporation, like sued Filmation because they were like, wait a minute, this is not public domain Pinocchio. This is our Pinocchio. Like at the beginning of the movie, Pinocchio is a real boy because that's what happens at the end of the story. But then he gets magically turned back into a puppet, and the puppet looks a lot like the Pinocchio in the Disney movie. And James Earl Jones is the villain in this movie. He voices this villain called the Emperor of the Night, who is like in a carnival or something. I don't know. It gets a little complicated.
Oh yeah.
But
that sounds great though. I like James Earl Jones as the Emperor of the Night.
Yeah, and he's the one who like turns Pinocchio back into a puppet. And I don't remember like what exactly there's this the most striking scene of the movie is like the scene in which Pinocchio gets turned into a puppet again, and like there's like marionette strings coming out of the villain's hands, like Spider-Man or something, and it's actually kind of cool. And the rest of the movie is super boring. The most interesting part of it is that when Disney sued them, Filmation won in court. Like this is so obviously like ripping off like the Disney Pinocchio characters, but a court decided that no, this is using public domain properties, and so Disney, you don't get to sue them for this story. And so this shitty ass movie is like a beacon of hope for anyone who wants to make like Mickey Mouse movies now that Steamboat Willie is in the public domain.
I'm sure we'll get some at some point. We've gotten things
well,
like the Winnie the Pooh horror movie, the Winnie the Pooh
yeah,
slasher.
Winnie the Pooh is more complicated, or is easier a little bit because there is a public domain character
right.
that Disney doesn't own. Whereas Steamboat Willie is a creation of Disney. It is simply now in the public domain, but you can't use Mickey Mouse, just Steamboat Willie. Anyway,
I think someone owes it to the culture to make the Steamboat Willie slasher film.
Does this mean that like out of all these like Pinocchio movies that they're making, that like Disney has like hired people who are watching all of them to make sure they don't cross over into Disney's Pinocchio land? Because like
I don't know.
what a life.
They continue to make Pinocchio movies too. I mean, y'all will get into it too, but if you look at the Wikipedia page for Pinocchio, like as recently as like 2021 or something like that, or maybe it was 2023, there was like a non-Disney Pinocchio movie.
That's
But
crazy.
yeah, it's wild. Like they keep making them. And I don't know. None of the ones that I watched were good, but y'all watched better ones, I think. So I'll
We
flip
sure
it off
did.
to you.
All right. Well, I don't know about the ones Andrew watched, but I probably watched the best one,
I'm so excited to hear about this.
and that's
Oh, man.
Pinocchio's Revenge.
Yes.
Hell yeah.
And you know how you were talking about all the stuff of like, oh, like they take off from the Disney's Pinocchio movie, and they're like using elements of that. Well, what if we didn't have any of that? What if the only vestige left is that there's a puppet named Pinocchio, and that was it? There's no
I'm into it. I'm ready.
because instead of the Italian countryside with Geppetto and Figaro and Cleo and the whale, all those things, we're in Tampa, Florida in the late 90s, hunting down
Italy.
basically Italy. Tampa, Florida, where it was filmed in the outskirts of Los Angeles, and we're following Jennifer Garrick, a district attorney who is tasked with defending a serial killer, and who like is begging her to get the electric chair. Like,
Dude, wouldn't it be awesome if this guy was like the child trafficker from like the Pleasure Island like ring?
no, we don't connect any of that. No, there's no connections. You don't understand. This
This is
wild
like
that
an
that's
easy connection to make.
no, we have no connections. So then naturally she ends up. So for whatever reason, he had a puppet. I don't know why he had a puppet.
It's how he lured in the children to kill them.
He had a puppet, and so then she's like, you know what? This guy seems fine. I'm gonna take this puppet home and take it to my daughter. And so
As one does.
she's living a happy life. She's got a boyfriend. Her daughter is starting school, and now her daughter really like becomes attached to this puppet Pinocchio. Proceeds to start bringing the puppet with her to school, which that's not going to win you any friends, I'll be honest, because it's a giant ass clunky puppet. And little did we not know, but the puppet Pinocchio has this evil serial killer spirit to it. And I'm sorry, I'm going to spoil this part of the movie to you, but
no, I'm not going to watch this movie. Please.
I'm sorry. I got to do it, guys. I got to do it. I'm sorry.
Oh my gosh! I cover your ears, everybody.
Yeah, but the serial killer guy who was killed, electrocuted to death, he actually didn't kill all these kids.
What?
The Pinocchio. The Pinocchio inhabited because the last kid who's killed is his son, and it's actually the puppet with its evil spirit has been like inhabiting his son, leading to him killing all these people, and the dad took the rap for it, and so now this evil spirit has attached itself.
Why would he take the fall for a puppet?
I don't know, man.
Send the puppet to jail.
They think, for whatever reason, they think he's crazy for insinuating that the puppet had anything to do with it. I don't know why. And so then the puppet's like, and it's great because late in the movie the puppet starts to talk, and you're like,
wait, late in the movie the puppet starts to talk?
Puppet hasn't talked for like a good hour, 15 minutes.
Oh my god!
Then the last 30 minutes of this movie, it's like, hey Zoe, maybe David should be around.
So he just sounds like the Pinocchio in Shrek.
Yeah, it kind of does. Like, he does sound like the Pinocchio in Shrek.
Is it creepy at all, or is it just
no? He sounds like this. And so, which honestly is funnier because he like has a non-creepy voice.
It's relevant to say this right now, but another thing I learned of in the making of doc of the Disney Pinocchio is initially they had adults trying to like do a child voice for the Pinocchio, and Walt Disney was like, absolutely not. It needs to be a real boy who does the voice for Pinocchio. So
well, they
sounds
didn't get
Pinocchio's Revenge could have taken some notes.
They hired what's his name? They hired Dick Beals, who had done voices for like Looney Tunes and stuff to do the voice for this.
That's a pretty good pedigree.
Yeah. So then so naturally the puppet, which the girl like cuts his strings, which like just releases him. So he just starts sprinting all over the place, killing people. And so the boyfriend dies. He pushes him downstairs, and then that doesn't kill him. So he goes and cuts his air at the hospital, and you're like, damn, Pinocchio.
Oh my gosh.
Then they kill the nanny, the hot nanny for whatever reason that she had. Her name's Sophia. She has an Italian. She's Italian and has an Italian accent. I don't know why. It's a very bad Italian accent. She's like, Pinocchio. Yeah, it's the most Italian we get into it. She's like, Pinocchio, what are you doing? You know, like it's bad.
That's just inspired by the original novel.
Yeah, that's where a little bit of the crossover comes into. And then finally, like Pinocchio tries to kill the mom, but she's able to fight it off. And the movie ends with her institutionalizing her daughter into a sanatorium.
Dang.
Damn.
Yeah. There's a sex scene in this.
Pinocchio's not involved.
No, it's honestly funny because it's like the mom and the boyfriend are just, and it's like I was telling Michael before, it's like not graphic, but like you get some boob, like there's like like you see them like on top of each other and stuff, and you're just like, why are you getting like really into this sex scene right now? And you're cutting back to like the girl in her bedroom with Pinocchio like staring at the wall, like it's really strange. Pretty much, this is like a really bad Child's Play Chucky ripoff.
I was gonna ask, like, how inspired by Child's Play? Because this is less than 10 years after Child's Play.
That's what it is. I mean, that's what it is. It's entertaining for a time. Then it kind of gets boring. My favorite fun fact was that the main character, the lead actress in this, her claim to fame was being the girl that George is trying to impress in the Seinfeld episode, the marine biologist, which is one of the best Seinfeld episodes. So like that's cool.
Yeah.
But
I do like that Pinocchio is just a vehicle for copyright infringement.
Yeah,
whether it's Disney's Pinocchio or Child's Play.
They didn't even put this in theaters. It was a direct to video. They were like, the people still want to see this Pinocchio. Yeah, it's a strange movie. I don't know why, but I'm glad that this was the movie I watched for this section.
That sounds far superior to any of the three that I watched.
Damn. Well,
I at least had a good time.
I admire y'all for being committed to watching like the strangest Pinocchio movies you could.
Well, I already seen the good Pinocchio movies.
Yeah, I texted
Michael.
I texted Michael. I was like, I don't want to watch a good one. Like, give me something.
Entering our dumpster diving era of Cinematary.
Yeah.
Anyways, I watched good Pinocchio movies.
You did.
To talk about. Also, would like to preface by saying that like what inspired me to seek out other Pinocchio movies was this excellent video essay by Jacob Geller, who's like primarily a video games critic. He made a video a couple months ago called "Pinocchio is a Story About Art and God," that I would recommend people go listen to. After they get done with this Pinocchio marathon, I know that they want 45 more minutes of Pinocchio deep dive.
He talks about some that.
To be fair, they've all turned this podcast off and are watching.
Yeah, if you have gotten to this point, you want to watch the Jacob Geller.
No, they're watching Pinocchio's Revenge.
Right? Well, he covers Pinocchio movies that we don't cover, by the way, like the live action. Also talks about the Lies of P.
Yes,
which is like a Dark Souls.
Yeah. Which is a game that I tragically have not played, despite being
Andrew. I was counting on you to have some experience.
If I had like another month to prepare for this Pinocchio episode, I would have played Lies of P 100%.
We didn't need a whole month to prepare for this.
Anyways, the movies I watched were Steven Spielberg's AI Artificial Intelligence from 2001 and Guillermo del Toro's 2022 Pinocchio, and I'll go through those in chronological order since it seems like we've kind of gone through chronological order so far. Anyways, AI, artificial intelligence. I imagine a lot of people have probably seen it, especially if they're like of our age. I have like a lot of nostalgia for seeing this DVD case in Blockbuster as a kid. It's like this very striking image of like this almost amusement park track going through this like neon woman's face. But it is a sci-fi story that was originally in pre-production or put into pre-production by Stanley Kubrick, who tried to make it for several decades, I believe, until either passing it off to Spielberg or dying. I don't know what order those things happened in.
I read, because I watched this a couple months ago. I think the Kubrick stuff is a little overblown.
Really?
Like, I think
it feels very Kubrick.
He was tangentially involved a little bit. Like, it was kind of one of those, oh, this seems interesting, but this is honestly more Spielberg than Kubrick.
Kubrick had a million projects that he almost embarked upon, but this was one of them that he did not. But Spielberg, I think, is a great fit for this story. It is the story of it's a futuristic society that has kind of created artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is normalized in the society. There's a lot of like sex work that is done by artificial intelligence androids. People have like servants in their house that are androids. At least people of a certain class do anyway. But none of those androids really like have at least what this society understands as like true emotional capacity. The big breakthrough at the beginning of the movie is some tech company guy invents a robot that knows how to love. And he's inspired by the fact that he lost his child and kind of wants to create a surrogate child. This is kind of the Pinocchio part of the story. Like, I'm going to construct an artificial boy to kind of take the place of the real boy that doesn't exist in my life. And he gets adopted, like the first prototype of this like boy who can love, played by Haley Joel Osment, by the way, gets adopted by a family whose son is in a coma, and they're not sure if they're going to get their son back. It's looking like they probably aren't. So they take on this like android child to kind of fill that void. And this movie is really strange and really creepy. And I like it a lot. One thing that I picked up on early on that I thought was probably a Kubrick thing, but like you said, maybe the Kubrick stuff is overblown. I know that Kubrick was like really big on like collecting lots of little details that are going to sort of be peppered throughout the movie, that you can kind of like focus in on and kind of interpret the movie on this like almost fractal level. I noticed that at one point the mother figure in like the new Pinocchio's life is reading a book called Freud on Women, which is very interesting considering how Freudian everything in the story is. I mean, all of the Pinocchio movies are kind of like about the pull between like the id and the super ego, right? What you feel like, what you've been told by society you should do versus what you maybe want to do selfishly. But this one also has a lot of like uncanny stuff going on because we have a real boy playing an android playing a real boy. And there's something very creepy about Haley Joel Osment's performance, and just in general the weird sense of like not quite like you're kind of hitting the beats of what a like perfect child would be, but like perfect children don't actually even exist. Like a child that never complains or fusses or like causes trouble, it feels weird, right? Like and also there's just kind of a stiffness and a like too like laser focused happiness coming out of this child that it just like feels off. It feels weird. And there's all the mother fixation stuff, which like where this movie eventually goes involves like I don't want to like spoil the end of the movie. I know that a lot of people have seen it, but it would take a very long time to explain plot wise where this movie ends up going. But
really contentious ending too. Like there are some people who hate this movie because of the ending.
I used to be one of these people, actually.
But the tide has turned on that. Actually, I feel like that's becoming a minority position.
No, absolutely. I remember watching this movie when I was in college, and it was when I was like on a big Kubrick kick. I had recently seen 2001. It like completely, knocked my brain open.
He was like, I know this stuff.
And like I watched like all the Kubrick movies, and I heard that he wanted to make this one, and I remembered it from my childhood. I actually watched it with my parents when I was a kid, and they made me turn it off once we got to like the Flesh Fair stuff in the middle.
Ooh, the Flesh Fair.
That shit's nuts.
It really is. Wow. It really is. Also, War of the Worlds. Spielberg's War of the Worlds. My parents took me out of the theater once it got to a certain point, and I remember
like all the people's clothing in the river or something like that.
It was the scene like in the basement with the guy.
Oh man, that one's brutal too.
Anyways, coming back to it now, I had a very different perspective on it because originally I had kind of this brain dead Kubrick stan perspective, which is like Spielberg ruined Kubrick's thing. Like Kubrick was making this like, really arty masterpiece, and Spielberg makes it into a movie with like a schmaltzy happy ending. But that is a stupid reading of the end of this movie. This is not a schmaltzy happy ending. It is like darkly ironic and strange. You don't really know how to feel at the end of it. It feels like the kind of ending that Kubrick might have made for a movie. And I just in recent years I've grown to such a deeper fondness for Steven Spielberg as a director. I think that it was seeing The Fabelmans that really like flipped a switch in my brain and made me realize like, oh, this is like one of the greatest like blockbuster filmmakers of all time, like if not the greatest blockbuster filmmaker of all time. I would say
yeah and like also like really great use of irony in his movies too. Like there's just so many places. I think it's like underrated because he's known as like a Frank Capra kind of kind of sentimentalist but, like there's like stuff that's like incredibly dark and ironic in his movies. Like have you seen Empire of the Sun?
I've not. No.
There's the moment in Empire of the Sun when Christian Bale's character sees the flash from the nuclear bomb going off in over Hiroshima, and it's like a moment of wonder for him. He like a astrological sign or something like that. Like there's just like stuff like that all throughout like Spielberg's filmography.
He's a much more complicated filmmaker than I think my stupid young brain perception of his reputation would suggest.
Well, especially once you start digging into like this era of like the AI era, like you mentioned War of the Worlds, like War of the Worlds,
Minority Report.
Minority Report is so good.
You get like Munich and stuff like that. Like dude, he's kind of on a heater,
Yeah. Underrated. I need to watch some of the 21st century stuff too, because I never watched like Bridge of Spies or Lincoln or The Post. We're actually going to do The Post on the podcast later this year, right?
Are we?
I guess The Post sucks.
Oh, well.
Sorry to The Post.
Spoilers for our journalism series.
Yeah, I don't want to do The Post.
Damn.
Well, I'll have to watch The Post on my own. I'm on a Spielberg kick myself. But AI is great. You should watch AI. The cinematography fucking rules. The effects fucking rule.
Will you watch War of the Worlds so then we can talk about
I would love to watch War of the Worlds.
Yeah.
That's probably the next place I'll go, honestly.
Hell yeah.
Anyways,
Pinocchio. Sorry.
I do have another Pinocchio to talk about, and that is Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. It came out in 2022. It was a movie that I skipped. I didn't watch it the year that it came out because I was really anti Del Toro at that point. I'd kind of like grown weary of the kind of middling Del Toro blockbuster.
I don't remember that. What started that? Was it Shape of Water?
Shape of Water, maybe.
Shape of Water, I think. And I remember being really high on Shape of Water when it came out, but like it immediately soured in my mind as just like a very basic, overly straightforward thing. And I feel like so much of Del Toro's filmography is kind of him punching below his weight class, if that makes sense. Like, I know because I've seen Pan's Labyrinth, I've seen Kronos, I've seen The Devil's Backbone, that like he can make a great movie. And I don't want to watch Pacific Rim from
so
a
you're
guy
saying
who
like
make those movies.
You're saying like his move to Hollywood, those movies are punching below his weight class.
Yeah, Nightmare Alley. So. I totally forgot about. I was trying to think like what was between Shape of Water and Pinocchio. It was Nightmare Alley, which I never saw.
My favorite of his English language movies is definitely Crimson Peak, which is like him just kind of leaning into all of his pet themes and aesthetics and literary tropes, and just like crafting something like kind of, not particularly heady, but like fun. I really like Crimson Peak. But this movie, Pinocchio, so good, y'all. Like, I think that Del Toro should maybe just always be working in stop motion.
He should. There's no doubt about
it.
Like,
it's the same deal as Wes Anderson, where, I think Wes Anderson's best movie is Fantastic Mr. Fox. And a part of that, why that is that like all of his movies are dioramas. He wants to like paint every inch of the set. Why not just make an animated movies? And in some of his recent pictures, Wes Anderson, there have been little animated sequences that have been among my favorite stuff in those movies. But anyways, Del Toro, similar thing in that like he's just kind of obsessed with certain aesthetics. I mean, he's really, really good at bringing them to life and like making them feel tangible and strange. And I think that trying to morph the real world into that is actually probably harder than making an animated thing. Not to disparage like the amount of effort that goes into making stop motion animated films. Like that is an immense amount of effort, but I think it's honestly a great fit for Del Toro. I love the character design, the monster design in this movie is just immaculate. Pinocchio himself looks very different than any other Pinocchio I've seen. He doesn't have that boyish Disney quality. He is like carved out of a block of wood, and he has like this really like subtly curling hair from like the top of a stump that is making up his head. And he's just kind of like broken in weird places, like put together by an old man while that old man was drunk. He's just like looks so interesting to look at, and that kind of goes for every single character and figure in this movie. It kind of reminds me of some of the best of the Leica stuff, where you just like looking at every individual like weird caricaturish character design that they've created, and especially in some of the like darker stuff, because Del Toro is really good at making monsters, and there's not a lot in the way of monsters in Pinocchio. There's Monstro, of course, but he's not really that monstrous. He's just kind of a big nasty whale. But in this movie, there is like a god or angel of death kind of character. Because Pinocchio is not a real boy, he cannot die. He like when he dies, as it happens to him several times throughout this film, he gets booted to like a purgatory space where he just sits for like a minute or two and then kind of spawns back in to the land of the living. And there's this like almost, it's like a cross between like a Dante-esque monster and like a biblically accurate angel. This creature that is played by Tilda Swinton has like all these like blinking eyes on their wings. Stuff like that is just, I'm sure we'll talk in the Disney part of this episode about like the wonder and the magic of seeing the original Disney Pinocchio. And like, you don't really get that in a lot of animated movies, at least in like recent years, because of how like homogenized and CG overblown everything has become. But there's just so much like interesting shit to look at in this movie. And, movies being primarily a visual medium, I think that like that like is worth its weight in gold. But there's also like so much interesting narrative and thematic stuff happening in this movie. Jacob Geller talks about it much more eloquently than I'll be able to talk about it in his video essay. So go watch that. But the main gist is that Del Toro makes the Pinocchio story about fascism because fascism and making anti-fascist cinema is just kind of a preoccupation of Del Toro's. He's been doing it since The Devil's Backbone. And did it again in Pan's Labyrinth, and there's shades of it in The Shape of Water, etc. Here, Pinocchio, this Italian story, takes place in fascist Italy under Benito Mussolini.
Played by Tom Kenny, by the way, aka SpongeBob.
Amazing. I did not know that. I did not know that. But, Pinocchio, the original Disney movie, is very much about obedience and like doing the right thing, kind of meaning doing what adults tell you to do, and fascism being a really good example of why that is not a good idea, and why how like one thing could lead us to the other. If you just kind of listen to what the big strong men tell you to do, you kind of end up drifting in that direction societally. So all that stuff is extremely well handled. I think it's my favorite of Del Toro's like dalliances with the idea of fascism in cinema. I really like the way that it's done in Devil's Backbone and Pan's Labyrinth, but in both of those movies, it feels like fascism is mostly just kind of like a big bad in the background of the movie. Not to say that the movies aren't about fascism, but this one, it like kind of delves a little bit deeper into the ideology of fascism and like how it gets disseminated, how people kind of get programmed to be fascist. I think Del Toro does all that stuff incredibly well in Pinocchio. The one thing that I remember being kind of controversial about this movie when it came out is that it is a musical as well. There are songs throughout the movie.
Dude, I totally forgot that it was a musical.
And
I like this movie a lot.
They wish that it wasn't. That the songs were not in there. They didn't think the songs were very good. They didn't think the song added anything. It's also a longer movie than the Disney's Pinocchio, but it tells a similar story. And a lot of that time is kind of padded out with songs. But I don't know. My take is that the songs are actually pretty good. I liked almost all of the songs. I really enjoyed all of the voices of the singers they chose to sing them. The songs are always kind of short and like well integrated into scenes or overlaid with interesting montages. There's also like kind of a theatrical element to the movie because Pinocchio gets enlisted in the circus, as he does in many Pinocchio movies, and is like forced to sing songs, including a song directly sung to Mussolini at one point, who promptly shoots Pinocchio after the performance. But yeah, I thought this movie is freaking great. And one of my favorite Del Toro movies. Extremely glad that I watched it. And I really hope that he's going to do some more stop motion stuff because it is a really, really good fit for him, I think.
I want to say he's working on something else stop motion.
He's always working on something that sounds incredibly interesting, like his the Mountains of Madness adaptation or his Frankenstein adaptation.
Those have all been out.
These things have all like been exactly. He's been working on these quote unquote for like a decade at this point. So who knows if we'll ever see them. But we saw his Pinocchio, and it's good.
And just mentioning, this is it's on Netflix. It was released through Netflix, but they have a 4K release of this through Criterion.
Yes, that's how I watched it. I checked it out from the library and watched it on the Criterion Blu-ray, and it looked stunning. Also, stunning packaging. There's like Pinocchio's
the cover is really cool.
Kind of like wraps around the digipack, and there's some really great essays on the inside. One's from Matt Zoller Seitz, and the other's from Cornelia Funke, the young adult children's author.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Weird. Okay.
So I haven't read those yet, but I'm kind of curious to dig into them.
All right. Well, we're going to take a brief Pinocchio break.
Yeah.
And then we'll be back with 1940s Disney's Pinocchio after this.
Yo.
And we're back with part 2 of episode 477 of Cinematary. In this part, we're going to be talking about Howard Hawks' Rio Bravo.
Zach's nose is growing.
Yeah, wouldn't that just been like a nice pivot? Like we talked about Pinocchio movies for the whole part 1, and then we're like, we're going to talk about John Wayne.
We all just coincidentally watched Pinocchio movies this week.
So Rio Bravo. No, we're going to be talking about 1940s Pinocchio, Disney's Pinocchio. Let me change for the YouTube audiences. I should say Disney's Pinocchio instead of Pinocchio. I don't want to get sued.
Don't worry, Pinocchio and the Emperor of the Night forged the path toward legal non-Disney Pinocchio.
That's true. Directed 1940, directed by Ben Sharpstein, Hamilton Lusk, Bill Roberts, Norman Ferguson, Jack Kinney, Wilfred Jackson, and T. He. So like half of those were supervising directors, and then half of those were like the sequence directors. The film stars Cliff Edwards, Dickie Jones, Christian Rube, and Walter Catlett. When the woodworker Geppetto sees a falling star, he wishes that the puppet he just finished, Pinocchio, could become a real boy. In the night, the Blue Fairy grants Geppetto's wish and asks Jiminy Cricket to serve as the wooden boy's conscience. But the naive and trusting Pinocchio falls into the clutches of the wicked honest John, who leads him astray to the sinful Pleasure Island. According to the AMPAS library, the original Carlo Collodi story was written in installments for an Italian weekly magazine. Work on Pinocchio began while Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was being completed in 1937. A March 6, 1938 New York Times article noted that Pinocchio had been, quote, held up by story difficulties, and therefore Bambi, which was also in production, would probably be released first. Bambi was ultimately not released until 1942, due partially to the difficulty of drawing the animals realistically. A June 12, 1938 New York Times article reported that Disney, quote, had just discarded 2,300 feet of Pinocchio, which had missed the feeling he had in mind. According to a modern source, this footage was the result of at least 5 months of work. In case you were wondering why people went on strike at Disney soon after this movie came out. A large part of the problem was the characterization and the look of Pinocchio, who in the original stories was not a very appealing hero. Disney and his staff gave the puppet a more sympathetic personality, and the depiction of him progressed from an angular stick-like figure to a more rounded, quote, cute shape. One New York Times article stated that when they first began work on the production, Disney artists used the drawings of Attilio Massino, which accompanied Collodi's story as a basis for Pinocchio. According to modern sources, children's book illustrator Gustav Tindgren drew the initial sketches and paintings that inspired the picture's, quote, European storybook flavor. Tindgren left the project before it was completed, however, and did not receive on-screen credit for his work. As Pinocchio's features were refined, Disney decided to include the cricket character from the story, although in Collodi's version, the puppet kills the cricket. Naming him Jiminy, Disney asked his artist to create a cricket who looked, quote, like a human being and, quote, talked in war clothes. Cliff Edwards, who provided the voice of Jiminy, was originally tested for the voice of Pinocchio, quote, but Disney had turned him down because there was a drop of adult in his voice. The voice actors worked intermittently for 19 months, quote, projecting dialogue and song into a microphone for transfer to a soundtrack. When this track was broken down into charts allotting footage for every vowel, consonant, and syllable, Disney animators drew pictures to fit. One day, sequence director T. Thornton He, quote, donned a Stromboli costume, got up in front of Walt Disney and the other storymen, spoke the dialogue, and acted exactly as Stromboli would. Other contemporary sources also note that the animators often acted out scenes for each other for visual references on expressions and movements. Marjorie Bell was the model for Snow White, as well as the Blue Fairy, and was married to animation director Art Babbitt at the time of production. Although Walter Catlett provided the voice of J. Worthington Foulfellow, quote, the characterization was based upon a couple of famous actor brothers whose last names begin with B. It is likely that the article is referring to Lionel and John Barrymore. 2 million drawings were created for Pinocchio, of which 300,000 were used in the final film. The studio's use of the multi-plane camera helped create the realism and detail lauded in contemporary reviews. The multiplane camera was first used in the 1937 Disney short The Old Mill and Disney's first feature, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. According to Life in the New York Times, the picture cost $2.5 million, and modern sources note that much of this cost went into the scenes filmed by the multiplane camera, single sequences of which cost up to $48,000. According to a 1940 New York Times article written by Walt Disney himself, the cameras were much improved from those used previously. Disney stated, quote, "Among the most important new developments is a type of universal camera crane, a development whereby instead of using a vertical method of shooting, as on the original Disney multiplane camera, the camera dollies into a scene or away from it on the same principle as motion picture photography in a live action studio. The backgrounds which we were able to use on this camera for Pinocchio were twice as big as those which fitted into the original multiplane setup used in Snow White." Another advance Disney described in the New York Times article is, quote, "the blend, a, quote, technique which gives roundness and dimensions to the characters. The blend was accomplished by 12 ink and paint girls who would use a variety of special paints and rouge to add depth, roundness, and highlights to the scenes. The example Disney gives is the scene in which Geppetto, thinking that someone has broken into his workshop, looks around while holding a candle. The highlights on his turning head and body, as reflected by the candle, are a result of the blend." Paolo Lorenzini, author Collodi's nephew, asked the Italian Ministry of Pop Culture to sue Disney because he distorted the character of Pinocchio to make him seem more American. Lorenzini stated that, quote, "Pinocchio's adventures are an Italian work of art and must not be distorted to make it American." No indication that action was taken on his complaint has been found. At first, Pinocchio was not a box office success. The box office returns from the film's initial release were both below Snow White's unprecedented success and below studio expectations. Of the film's $2.6 million negative cost, twice the cost of Snow White, Disney only recouped $1 million by late 1940, with studio reports of the film's final original box office take varying between 1.4 and 1.9 million. Animation historian Michael Barrier notes that Pinocchio returned rentals of less than 1 million by September 1940, and in its first public annual report, Walt Disney Productions charged off a $1 million loss to the film. Barrier relays that a 1947 Pinocchio balance sheet listed total receipts to the studio of 1.4 million. This box office reception was primarily due to the fact that World War II and its aftermath had cut off the European and Asian markets overseas and hindered the international success of Pinocchio and other Disney releases during the early and mid-1940s. Joe Grant recalled Walt Disney being, quote, "very, very depressed about Pinocchio's initial returns at the box office." In 1940, the New York Times said, what really matters and all that matters this morning is that Pinocchio is here at last. Is every bit as fine as we had prayed it would be, if not finer, and that is as gay and clever and delightful a fantasy as any well-behaved youngster of jaded oldster could hope to see. And in 1940, Time magazine said, in craftsmanship and delicacy of drawing and coloring, in the articulation of its dozens of characters and the greater variety.
Dozens of characters? What movies did they watch?
In the greater variety and depth of its photographic effects, it tops the high standards Snow White's set. The charm, humor, and loving care with which it treats its inanimate characters puts it in a class by itself.
It's good. Yeah.
Yeah. On that note, let's talk about some Pinocchio. Pinocchio.
Pinocchio.
How many times have y'all seen this?
I honestly have no idea. I've not seen it as an adult, period. But I feel like I've caught it, at least in pieces several times as a kid.
I want to say this is a number that is probably super imprecise, but I think it would not be an exaggeration to say like over 3 dozen times for me, because I watched this movie. I watched this movie a lot as a kid. Jarvis, my son, has watched this movie a number of times, and then
when you have a kid that's into a movie, they watch.
Yeah, but this wasn't one of the ones that he's been obsessed over, but he's watched it a few times. And then I, as an adult, have watched a handful of times.
To appease his dad, he's like, "All right, Dad, we'll watch this."
Well, it is sort of true because I have it on Blu-ray, so it's like one of the movies that he sometimes chooses from that we have all lined up. But I've seen this movie a lot.
Yeah, you're our resident Pinocchio scholar. and like resident early Disney scholar, right? Do you want to talk about your project that you did several years back?
Yeah,
well,
I guess.
Before that, can I ask, like, how do you talk through with your son the child trafficking aspect of this movie?
Such a good question. Oh my god,
it's never come up. You know, he's never asked a question about it, and I've not like brought it up.
Really, because this was the first time, similar to Andrew, that I watched through this like from start to finish as an adult, and I was like, a lot more child trafficking.
Yeah,
than I remember.
Just a Jeffrey Epstein character in the middle of this.
Yeah.
It's also funny that the villains are all voiced by the same guy. Like the guy who voices Stromboli is also the guy who voices like the coachman who lures in all the boys to Pleasure Island.
What about Honest John?
No, he's a different guy.
Okay.
I don't know. Like Jarvis is just now, he's 5. He's just now getting to the point where he has like questions and you can have conversations about him, like with him about things. And I think there is something like kind of like elemental and archetypal about Pinocchio, which is that like the world outside of your family unit is like unspeakably dangerous.
Yes.
Like immediately, like Pinocchio walks out his door to go to school and immediately is led astray by an evil world. And I think that there is an element of that like as children just like scans as like kind of that tracks, like because you're most comfortable with your family unit, and then once you go outside of it you're nervous because there's all this strange stuff. And so I think that like as a child, like you don't question the fact that the movie portrays the outside world as like just hell-bent on destroying every child's life at all costs. Because maybe the world seems like that to you as a child, or sometimes adults portray the world as that to you, you know, like you know, I think I've not done this, we've not done this so much with Jarvis, but I think like you know, I grew up with like, you know, stranger danger, you know, don't talk to strangers, etc., etc.
This is kind of a horror for kids movie on a certain level.
Yeah. And also horror for parents.
He goes, well, and let me just say one thing, you know, not to defend the rest of the world in this movie, but Geppetto, maybe like, hey, day one of having a kid,
he sends him to
Don't
school.
Be like, go off to school,
he's
child.
Like, yeah,
he's
not
like, gonna tell you where it is.
He's like, fuck off. I'm not gonna walk you to school. I'm not gonna tell you where it is. Fuck off and go to school. That was day one.
It's amazing.
Day one. Bad parent.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe truancy in Italy is just a real strict matter, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, man, I got a kid now. Gosh, I got to get him in school quick before they get me. And Andrew, you talked about I did like a project a few years ago when I watched all of the Disney Animation Studios feature films.
How many movies is that?
At the time, it was right before Frozen 2. Which I think was like, I think Frozen 2 was like 50 or 51 or something like that.
Okay, I thought it was more actually.
No, because there's
movies.
Disney for a while, like half of Disney's output comes like post Little Mermaid, basically. Like they scale up the speed of production significantly.
That has not had negative consequences at all.
No, I mean, I don't know. They were pulling it off for a while.
Unfortunately, they were.
They couldn't keep it up. But anyway, Pinocchio is only the second one. So
crazy.
What's interesting about watching them chronologically is you can see where the costs start to catch up with the studio, because like you mentioned, Zach, like Snow White was a smash. Like I think adjusted for inflation, it's still one of the highest grossing films of all time.
It would have to be. It was the first animated feature ever, right? At least in America.
Maybe.
People have not seen anything like that before.
Yeah, I mean, like I think one of the things that is amazing about these films, like the early Disney films, is like audiences are seeing stuff that they genuinely had never seen before in a film. Like I was like watching the like whale chase at the end of this movie, which is an incredible, like amazing sequence regardless, like even now to me. But like I was thinking about like if I'm in 1940 and like the 40s are great for American cinema. Like there's a lot of great things going on in American cinema in 1940. But there has been nothing like even in animated shorts, which are like the nearest like, you know, cousin to like what's going on here. But like there's not animated shorts that are like the scope or the menace or like the spectacle of that. Like,
right.
Even like the big live action spectacle movies like King Kong or whatever, like do not have that like full color. Like, I don't know. I can't imagine
a little fake.
That. It would have been so overwhelming, I think, to see that. And
it's like our version of the Lumiere's, the train coming into the station,
100%,
but it's a whale just like barreling at you.
And you're there with your child, probably. Right? And like you're worried about how is this going to get too scary for them?
Yeah. But anyway, what I was saying
is the child trafficking. It's like
that's fine. Yeah. This movie is like what in this movie is not horrifying after he comes across Honest John, basically.
It's pretty bleak.
Hey, I don't think he's that honest, guys.
His actual character name, I was looking on Letterboxd. His actual character name is hysterical. It is Honest John Worthington Foulfellow.
Oh my gosh.
Sorry, Michael.
But all I was gonna say is like when you watch them chronologically, you can see that it's almost like the Disney studio becomes drunk with power after Snow White, and they feel invincible because like Pinocchio and Fantasia, which like are the ones that really benefited from like the treasure chest of money that they got from Snow White, like are just lavishly filmed and produced movies in a way that like Disney has basically never done before. Like these are like these movies look so expensive and gorgeous, and then both of those movies really underperformed at the box office, and immediately you see a drop off. Like Bambi, which is a really beautiful movie aesthetically in a lot of ways, the movement and the vibrancy of like the environments is so much more restricted than like what these movies do. And so like there's something I think really special about Pinocchio in the context of like Disney animation, in which like that and Fantasia are like the two movies that like it was never replicated again in like the studio's history, which is that they had like carte blanche to do whatever they wanted because they thought they were like commercially and artistically invincible.
I mean, they were a kind of monopoly in America, right?
They were, and they're an anomaly within like ever since those two movies, like Disney has been fairly conservative aesthetically, like, but those two movies are like just like we're gonna pull out all the stops and do everything that we can possibly do that's never been done before. And I think that makes Pinocchio really special now, even though it was only the second feature film that they made.
Yeah. Out of all the times that you watched it, Michael, did you ever just stop for a second in the beginning part and go, this star we're wishing upon, I wish I knew the origin story.
Yeah.
I wish I knew more.
That is the apotheosis of the thing we were talking about with Furiosa last time.
What do you
know the origin story for everything?
What's that star's story?
So as someone who has actually seen Wish, I was actually it's kind of bonkers that that's how they pitched the movie, because it's not within the film. Like within the film, it does not present itself as a prequel to the star in Pinocchio. It simply has a star that you wish upon.
That's kind of a bummer. I would have liked it to like connect to Pinocchio.
Yeah, it's not as crass as it, at least in that way, as it may have seemed. But no, never have I wondered about that star.
Yeah. So let me just stray thoughts I was thinking while watching this. Let me just say, like great movie. It's fantastic. Yeah, stray thoughts. Jiminy Cricket is not great.
No,
fails his job like just from the jump.
From start. Yeah. She gives him his like new suit because he's a conscience, and he's like checking himself out in like a reflection or whatever, and then Pinocchio says something. He's like, "Oh yeah, I forgot about you."
Yeah. And like who thought that the cricket hobo that just showed up in the house was a perfect voice of conscience. The second thing is just Geppetto just telling him to fuck off and go to school literally hours after becoming alive.
Incredible.
The amount this is just a byproduct of like early animation, but the amount of like just like smoking and drinking
so much beer in this movie.
They're just getting hammered in this movie, and everybody's walking around with just a fat cigar. wild. And then
including Pinocchio.
Including
Pinocchio,
Pinocchio.
freaking takes a huge drag of a cigarette or a
Oh,
cigar. Excuse me.
I
Yeah,
was like, Pinocchio, save some for the rest of us. Jeez, you're the worst person to have in the group passing it around. You're just like, all right, man, like save some for
And
others.
you have that
Nightmare
amazing
blunt
sequence where
rotation.
his eyes are watering and he turns green.
Yeah, Pinocchio is not who you want in your blunt rotation. He seems like this hurts. And the other thing, and I've already said it, so much child trafficking. And like Honest John, like God love him, like I could understand him. He makes sense as a comic villain, but the whole Pleasure Island sequence is some demented ass shit.
Demented is such a
Well,
good
and even
word for
John is shocked at the
What is this
coachman
man's,
is like, you want to make
business?
some. Do you want the coachman's like, you want to make some money, and he's like, oh yeah, who do I have to kill? And he's like, no, we're not doing that. And he whispers to him, and Honest John is freaking out.
The coachman
He goes
who
all
I
the way
thought was inspired by like what is it, Andrew the Royal, who was like, I mean, it's Jeffrey Epstein, let's just be honest with ourselves. So I was immediately like, yeah, that's like Andrew or whatever his name is.
One thing that's always freaked me out about him is he has these those nondescript shadowy goons who don't seem to be human. Did you guys notice that?
Yeah, they're closing the gate. He's like,
right.
Close it, lock it.
True.
Yeah, no,
I'm not sure what you're supposed to think.
It's a true.
I have no idea.
Like you have like the psychedelic sequence in Alice in Wonderland, which it's awesome, but also a crazy ass sequence to have in an animated movie.
Mm-hmm.
But this takes the cake as what the are y'all on right now?
Well, that's one thing that I kind of admire about this movie compared to what Disney is now or has been for most of its lifetime, is this is a movie with a lot of actual danger and adult stuff that kids are encountering in a pretty safe way, to be honest. It's not like putting edgy stuff in children's entertainment is good for its own sake, but children's entertainment does kind of serve to teach children about the world, and you're not really doing those children favors by pretending the world is more squeaky clean than it actually is a lot of the time. I really admire, I probably say it all the time, the Maurice Sendak's approach to writing children's entertainment. He thinks that you have to it's a sign of respect to acknowledge that the kids can handle more than we often give them credit for being able to handle.
By the way, Sendak is a huge fan of this movie.
I believe it. Yeah.
I actually found this out because it's on the Wikipedia page for the film, but there's a whole paragraph about Sendak's thoughts
That's awesome.
on the movie.
Anything stand out you want to read?
He thinks it's better than the novel because in the source novel, Pinocchio is just evil. He's an evil child who
Jacob Geller describes him as a dipshit.
Dude, he's demented from even as he's being carved, he's intentionally trying to make Geppetto cut himself on the knife and stuff like that. And then slowly becomes good. Whereas Sendak likes the idea of Pinocchio not being malicious. He's an innocent, naive child,
right?
Who's basically sole mistake in the movie is to be trusting.
Because
which he thinks is
he not? He's kind of been told to be obedient, right?
And that's a much interest of, according to him, and I think I agree, although the book I think has its merits, but I think that's a much more interesting narrative tension than this evil child needs to be reined in and domesticated. Although I did run into something that was kind of interesting, an analysis of this movie that said Pinocchio is one of the most overtly bourgeois of Disney movies, in the sense of it and the schooling goes into this. It is at every step kind of an attempt to assimilate certain impulses into middle class respectability.
Fairy tales in general, just kind of function as that.
Yeah, and I think presenting the child as an innocent and presenting the world as corrupt is kind of going into that as well, because you as a parent protect your child, in your kind of middle class values. You don't have to beat the evil out of your child. I think that's a more middle class bourgeois way to think of it, is that the child needs to be protected from the world rather than child.
the Disney movie kind of portrays children and families as kind of innately good in a way, though also like having that human inclination towards like temptation and vice in them as well, that like needs to kind of be taken care of in a very like cautious way.
Yeah, I would also say that like the one thing actually as an adult that has struck me, and I think it strikes many people as they watch old Disney movies, is that like you very clearly see the like social perspective of like the people who created this movie. So like for instance, this film takes place in Italy, but the only character who is like heavily coded as like ethnic Italian is the villain Stromboli, who is
it ain't great.
Like arguably like they use like a Roma slur, like they call him a gypsy, which does I don't know, like I looked into that, I was like, is this supposed to be like not is he supposed to be like not Italian, like otherized in that way, or is he otherized because he's Italian? And the canon
I guess it could go either way.
Canon seems to say that he is Italian, and that
but I guess the story takes place in Italy because you have Geppetto,
right? But like all of those folks are very like Geppetto is very like waspy, and Pinocchio too, and like the ethnicity comes out like when it's villainous, and also the vices that like Pinocchio does are like vices that were associated with the kind of like working class or like underclass like perceptions of like ethnic Europeans, so like carnies and drinking, which for a time was heavily like European ethnic in the United States, like coded. So like I think there's like that element of the movie too, where like the moralizing also comes with like I think something that would become much more pronounced as like you can see like throughout the rest of Disney history, which is that it's like middle class bourgeois morality is also tied to like a vision of like a idealized American whiteness.
Yeah, very like sinister conservative streak running through a lot of Disney stuff, especially the stuff when he was alive.
Yeah, and I mean this is not the worst of it, but it's like as an adult, it's something that when I've watched it kind of does stand out to me, which is that there's some visual shortcuts being taken with some of the characters.
Right. Also guilty of like Dr. Seuss, also a person kind of guilty of this.
Yeah.
Not to the extent of Walt Disney, of course, but yeah.
You thought it was just green eggs and ham. Are you wrong?
Oh my gosh.
What else have we not talked about with Pinocchio? I feel like there's
there's so many things. I want to, Zach, you mentioned the multiplane camera, and like I have seen this shot so many times, but like every time I see it, I'm just like it makes me want to let my head explode. When the scene when Pinocchio is going to school, like a super famous scene, it's the Blu-ray menu. The music from it is the Blu-ray menu, but like it like starts with like a bell ringing, and you proceed to zoom in through the buildings of this town until you see like Geppetto and Pinocchio exiting their home, and it is like the most like it is incredible, like because it is going through like 7 or 8 planes of like animation, and like I looked it up, and like what they were doing is with like the camera was zooming in, they're pulling the planes back so that the camera could keep going through all these different like panes of glass, and it's just like with like modern animated movies that are cel shaded will do this with the aid of computers, but like knowing that like you could not accomplish this with computers, and in fact when you use the computers it looks different, like the way that like you see, because in animation you kind of tell where the static background drawings are versus like the dynamic animated ones, and the way that you see the character, like I know it's happening because like I've seen it so many times, but every time the camera passes one of the static background panes like and moves on to a new one, like just blows my mind, and it starts like moving horizontally and diagonally down as well. Like it's just such a technically jaw-dropping shot that like has very little like basically no precedent in animated history, and has very little precedent like outside of it or past this, or very little antecedent, I guess.
One thing that sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, there's multiple points in this movie where I'm like watching it thinking like, this is like one of the most amazing like things that's ever been put into animation. Like the whale sequence at the end, like with the water, like that is like just aesthetically overwhelming to me. Like I'm watching that, and like every single bit of the screen and all of those like shots is just like incredible. Like there's this scene, or there's this sequence of frames where the whale like turns to like catch up with them, and like what I was noticing, just like this incredible visual imagination where the outside of the whale, where it's like his momentum is like this roiling, frothing water, and then inside where the whale is already like slid, the water has become like smooth as glass. Anyway, I don't know. It's just like there's so much stuff that I could just go on and on and on about, like how amazing the like just the animated craft is. And again, like part of the reason it's amazing is that like all like animation is constantly like a struggle with budgets all the time. Like especially if you're not a Disney, like working with Disney, but even at Disney, like Disney has become very stingy with some stuff, and had to be in certain points of its career. And like just no one has made a movie like this expensive, like with the tools that they had at their disposal. And so like, you know, without the aid of like caps or like, you know, Pixar tools or any of that stuff, like the fact they were able to accomplish these things is like just astounding to me. Anyway, sorry, go ahead, Andrew.
A point that Jacob Geller makes in his video essay that I'm just going to steal now because it relates to yours, Michael, is how so much of Pinocchio, especially in the early stages, is just kind of basking in the wonder of animation as a medium. Like so many of the sequences or like what you're seeing on a minute by minute basis isn't really moving forward the plot or the characters. It's just kind of allowing you to marvel at like this clockwork animatronic thing that Disney has made. Not using those words literally, obviously, but like we're in a clock factory, or like his Geppetto's little like clock. What would you call it?
Like a workshop.
Yeah, and like so the walls are just lined with all these interesting, you know, unique mechanisms, and they are animating every single piece of those. You know,
they apparently made models of a lot of those, like working models of some of those clocks to base their drawings on. Because that was another thing I was watching this, and like one thing that's really awesome about this movie is the characters themselves, and not just like the human characters, but like the moving parts of the different, like they all have a different weight to them. Like the flesh creature, like the fleshy characters, like all feel very like spongy and like tactility to them. Like Figaro the cat, like is just this amazingly tactile. Like
I love Figaro and what's the fish's name?
Cleo the fish.
Those two creatures just both move in such awesome ways.
Yeah, and Geppetto too. And in those sequences, you have that contrasted with the highly mechanized like wooden clocks, which all feel
kind of a stuttering effect.
They feel like that. They don't like if you watch like silly symphonies or like early Looney Tunes or whatever. A lot of the stuff kind of feels the same sort of like squashy, stretchy.
Everything's
stuff.
bouncy. Everything's elastic. Yeah.
In this movie, like everything has this feel to it where the way that it moves tells you exactly like how heavy it is and like the limitations of like what it can do in this, like the physics of the scene. And I just think that's incredible. Like
you got a wooden boy at the center of it. You have
well, and also like how Pinocchio is animated when Geppetto is pulling the strings at the beginning versus how he is animated when he like comes alive and becomes like a magic talking puppet, like changes. And that in and of itself is just like an amazing work of like character animation that like the wooden boy has like, as the puppet with strings, has its own sort of like weight and movement to it that changes with like once the character changes into something that is different. I don't know. It's just amazing.
It really is. That Disney magic that is now cliche. Like,
dude,
it's actually here.
it truly is here. Like the Honest John and Gideon also are like incredible because of their clothing is always like just this moving like
so droopy.
And one fun thing I learned from the making of doc is that Mel Blanc like of Bugs Bunny was originally going to voice Gideon the cat, and they decided that they didn't like having Gideon talk So he became like the mime sort of character that he is now. But the only sound that Mel made that exists in the movie, I don't know if you remember this, but like at one point Gideon is drinking a beer.
Oh, it's a
he
hiccup.
he hiccups into his beer, and that's it.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
And what's up, Doc?
We got the best hiccupper in the game in this.
Yeah.
We
spared
all the stops.
We spared no expense. Any final thoughts on Pinocchio before we wrap up?
Man.
If you've got your Disney Plus account, here's the one thing to use it on.
Yeah, make sure you have a good internet connection so you get that HD. The Blu-ray, the Disney Blu-ray that they put out is very nice. It's got a ton of bonus features, like a really good transfer. Like Disney has had some trouble, apparently, like with some of its more recent home releases, like as they've been doing stuff in 4K, where like they do color correction and stuff on some of the old cells, and it makes it look weird. But like this one looks really good.
Michael, I'm sure you've already mentioned some stuff that you picked up from the documentary, but any like trivia that you want to throw out that you learned from watching that?
I mean, this is fairly common from Disney of the era, but most of the characters were given like kind of a supervising animator to work with. But the thing that and so like you have like the different animators like all kind of have their like unique spin on each character, which is one of the reasons why the character animation is so vibrant, and especially these old Disney films, is like the way that they kind of like doled out the duties, like, and so like a character has like the stamp of like a single vision. But one thing I didn't realize is that, and again this is pretty common for Disney in the era, is they would hire actors to do the motions so that the animators could watch how people, how real people looked when they do these things, and they wouldn't like copy the motions exactly, but they would use those as like reference points. But they showed pictures of some of the actors that portrayed the characters, and apparently with a few of them, so like Geppetto, for instance, and then also I'm trying to remember the other one, but they actually ended up changing what the character looked like because they really liked how the character actor, that like the human actor that they hired, looked doing these things. So that was really interesting. The other thing that I think was interesting is that they pointed out, the documentary pointed out that like in a lot of ways these early features were like a transitional point in Disney, because like they had been doing like shorts for like quite some time before they got around to the features. And you hear about like the 9 Old Men, like the kind of like animators that like basically like the 40s through the 60s or 70s, depending on were like the chief animators at the time, and those folks were just getting started with like Snow White and Pinocchio, whereas like the early shorts people were kind of starting to phase out. And so like the early features, so like the pre-World War II ones, are kind of like the confluence of like a lot of different talents that didn't really mix later in Disney, like as like the 9 Old Men and like the people who kind of cut their teeth on the features became the people in charge. And so I thought that was interesting too. Anyway, I love this movie. Andrew, you asked me if I still thought this was the best Disney movie, which I think it easily is. Like I think there's no contest in my mind. Like,
what's the top 5?
I don't know, like,
or top 3.
I mean, this, Fantasia. I really love Beauty and the Beast, which I think is like, Beauty and the Beast is one of the few Disney movies that works on a narrative level as well as it works on a animation level. Like most Disney movies, I'm mostly in it for the animation, but Beauty and the Beast is one of the few where the narrative is really like amazing. I think the Pinocchio narrative is pretty good. Like I think it works. I mean, as goofy as some of the stuff is, like Geppetto like sending him to school, like by the end of the movie, you do kind of, or at least I care about like Geppetto and Pinocchio, and it's kind of upsetting to see Pinocchio face down drowned in the pool at the end. I don't know. Those are the top 3 that I always have in my mind, is like Fantasia, Pinocchio, and Beauty and the Beast. Like I think those are like the the upper echelon, and everything else kind of filters down from there.
I'd work Emperor's New Groove in there somewhere.
Emperor's New Groove is awesome. I love it.
I love that movie.
But
also Lilo and Stitch.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good Disney movies. Like, as much as like Disney sucks, like the kind of unfortunate thing about like Disney's hegemony over animation is that it's produced a lot of really good work. In addition to some really subpar work as well. But there's a lot of really great Disney animated films, and I don't know. I think Pinocchio is easily the best because the animation craft is like so far ahead of like anything else that they ever did, and I think the narrative is good. Also, it does a lot of Disney things that normally are irritating to me, like wisecracking sidekicks and like animal sidekicks that I think like work really well here. Like Jiminy Cricket, like I think is actually really fun as like a completely incompetent conscience. Like I don't know, like in a way that like Eddie Murphy's Mushu in Mulan, which is nearly a film ruining movie or character for me. Like it just doesn't work like that, and I don't know how they lost that magic, but Jiminy Cricket
just became a trope, and they had to do it as like a cookie cutter thing. And now like Lampshade, that they're doing it like in Moana, but they're still just doing it.
I hate. Anyway.
I was looking back at our 2016 series, Disney in Transition.
Yeah,
we had Robin Hood, Oliver and Company, The Great Mouse Detective, Black Cauldron, Dinosaur, Emperor's New Groove, Lilo and Stitch, Treasure Planet, and Atlantis.
Man, that was only the second ever series that Cinematary did.
What a rough series of movies.
There's some good ones in there though.
A few.
Oliver and Company sucks.
Oliver and Company blows. Also, there's something always kind of fun when Disney goes into these like recessionary periods, because they do kind of produce like really shoddy, interesting, and sometimes good work. Like Lilo and Stitch or Emperor's New Groove would not exist in their current forms had they been produced in like the early 90s, for instance. And like
they had to be allowed to take some swings because it was like do or die, you know?
Yeah, and part of me feels like that Disney is entering another one of those, because their last few features have been just so shoddy and also really underperforming commercially. But also part of me, like Disney has more or less like ghettoized its like animation as like kind of like a boutique like niche thing that it like you know, I'm trying to remember like the last animated movie that it really No. I'm saying the last one that it really like felt like it believed in, like maybe Encanto, which at this point has been several years ago.
Yeah,
like Wish, Strange World, like both of those felt buried by the company. Like they were embarrassed by them.
One, and especially like the output that they're putting out now, like you compare that to like the Sony Pictures animation, like the Spider-Verses and things like
People
that.
People are doing much more interesting stuff.
Yeah, like they're go behind.
Yeah, the world of American animation has become a lot more diverse, and I think a lot more healthy. Than, I mean, for most of like until like the 70s, like when Disney kind of had its first like recession, like there was nothing. Like there's like years at a time in which there's not another animated feature film in America that's not Disney. And then like you get little cracks of it in like the 70s and 80s, especially as you have like the Disney animators peeling off like Don Bluth. And then the 90s kind of like they reassert dominance, and like Pixar kind of like takes up a lot of the air in the room in like the 2000s. But now it's so diverse. Like you've got like, not that all of these are amazing movies, like Sony, you got Blue Sky, or what was Blue Sky, I guess. You've got like, anyway, there's like a lot more going on, and like a lot of those are a lot more profitable than Disney is now. And I worry that like Disney's just going to kind of shutter its animation, or just only bring it out for like Moana 4 or something like that.
Well, Disney is kind of like, they're not really a movie studio anymore. They're just like a tech company. They're just like a
not even like a tech company. They're just like
the entertainment industry company. It does feel like they're more like wanting to be like the infrastructure of the industry than the people actually producing good work, because they don't need to.
Yeah, well, you'll get every once in a while, because Disney went through this like in the 70s and 80s. They really pivoted to the parks a lot, like, and that was kind of like their business model, and that's kind of happening now again. And what will happen is you'll have someone who comes along and like is really invested in reinvigorating animation. So like the Michael Eisner, Jeffrey Katzenberg, who both suck in a lot of ways, but like they really believed in like animation, were like interested in like refurbishing the animation brand, and that's where you got like the 90s Disney. And then again, a guy who sucks, but clearly like had a vision and wanted to refurbish Disney animation. In the mid 2000s, John Lasseter takes over like Disney animation, and you can see immediately like a clarity of purpose like in those films like coming after Lasseter took over, and he's gone now, and I really don't know who's flying the ship. Like
and also since that Lasseter Pixar merge, there's become a great blurriness to like the difference between a Pixar movie and a Disney Animated Studios movie, kind of in a bad way, where like they both kind of feel like they are just kind of a slop like of the two.
Well,
there have been some
rudderless.
great Pixar movies in the past couple of years. I'm a huge fan of Turning Red. I think Luca's really good too.
Yeah.
But in general, it seems like the bar for quality has gotten lower at Pixar.
Right. Well, they're both rudderless and increasingly interested in sequels. Like one thing that was always kind of cool about Disney is they wouldn't do sequels to their animated films, except for the direct to VHS stuff.
Right.
But like in the past 10 years, they've had like
now we're just mining IP.
Three or four like theatrically released sequels. It just feels like, I don't know, like again, I guess to wrap it back around Pinocchio, and Zach, you probably want to end, but watching Pinocchio feels so like there's almost something like I don't know, like people in the Renaissance would look back at like Greek sculptures and be like, we got to recapture that, and like I don't know, like you look back at like something like Pinocchio, is like, man, like people once were able to do this, and we've lost the ability to do this. Like I wish Disney
has anyways. But plenty of great animation being done outside.
No, yeah, there's so much great animation being done, like more now than
people should go check out. Really. If you want to watch like a good hand-drawn animation from the past decade, go watch the work of Tom Moore. Go watch Wolf Walkers, etc.
There is great animation being done, but like there's a sort of painterly like classical aesthetic that like the pre-World War II Disney movies achieved, that I think is really difficult for people to achieve now, because it required so much manpower and money that really only Disney still has, of the people who are interested in animation.
And Disney could still do that, but
they could still do that. They could make Fantasia 2025 and it would be amazing, but they refuse to, because they suck.
And on that note, that will wrap up episode 477. Disney sucks. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, on Twitter at handle @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where you can see all the Pinocchio movies that we talked about in this episode. If you'd like to support the show, patreon.com/Cinematary. Big thanks to our patrons, Cam, Ron Hayes, Tanner Huskin, Teresa Morsati, and Tyler Chandler. We appreciate your patronage. Next episode, we're going to be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1959's The Nightingale's Prayer, which is by an Egyptian movie by director Henry Barakat.
Are we now able to announce the thing that is closing out our Young Critics series this year?
Yeah, it seems we're about 90% of the way. We'll just jinx it and go ahead and say it. So very excited to announce. I don't know if anybody listening's in the Charlotte area or like the North Carolina area and wants to drive up, but we're going to be doing a live podcast for the first time in a number of years. It's been. I sent them over our last few live podcasts. I'm like, damn, that's been a while.
Was it Potemkin? Was that the last live podcast?
We did 3. We did Slumber Party Massacre, Slumber Party Massacre 2, and
I forgot that we did those. Yeah.
The 3 great.
The only 3 movies you need, really.
Yeah. But we're going to be closing out our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with a live podcast recording on Repo Man.
Alex Cox's Repo Man. Great movie.
Yeah. We're going to be doing that at the Independent Picture House in Charlotte, North Carolina on August 2nd.
August 2nd.
So if you're in the North Carolina area, like show up. We want to fill the theater up.
Absolutely.
But we're going to be.
We'll probably do some sort of Q&A portion of that, I would imagine.
So, so we're going to be watching the movie, and then after the movie, we're going to have a panel up there of Cinematary people, and we're going to talk about the movie. So
man, I'm stoked. Wait, did you say August 2nd? I thought we were doing August 3rd.
August 3rd. I knew it was August 2nd or 3rd.
Okay, August 3rd is the day. Yeah.
Yeah, August 3rd. They have it. They're still figuring out a time. I'm going to assume it's going to be like in between like 5 and 7 o'clock in that range.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. Let us contact us and let us know if you'd like to come to the screening. But live pod in Charlotte. So
and hopefully with another next year, next summer. That's in the works as well.
We don't totally flip this one.
Well, cool. Thanks y'all for listening, and we'll see you next episode.
Bye.